Twitless, what are we talking about today?
Who you gonna call when there's a spectral killer on the loose? Then there's no Ghostbusters around. What you do have is the people, a street level vigilante with a patriotic theme and a muscles and a bat and some good old fashioned American elbow grease. By day, he is Tom Adams. He is a courtroom sketch artist, and by the evenings, he patrols the streets as the people. And he's currently on the trail of a ghostly killer, Silhouette, who a killer of other killers. And but the people is trying to elevate things to a higher form of justice, and this means doing some ghost busting. And so that's what's going on in the people number two. Also, a building gets set on fire by Dr. Octane.
Yeah, so I was so thrilled to read this. This is my first Phil Diaz comic to read. And like art wise, it's a really fun tour de force of indie black and white storytelling. And it really leads into it. And it doesn't feel like a comic that is apologizing for not being in color. You know what I mean? Like I appreciate seeing I always call it dot gain. I think it's called bin day, the dot color gradient kind of thing. But people have kind of found a way to like retro, like you see it in people who like to do, manga and this and
Are we,
that.
are we talking about the Zipatone or?
Well, that's another way. Yeah, the dot grade, Zipatone. A lot of people do it poorly, mostly because it doesn't have to be done anymore. And it's done really well here. There's a lot of time, like because I'm often like coloring other people's comics. That's how I interact with a lot of these comics nowadays, and it's so refreshing to see when the selective shading, like a lot of the feminine characters actually have very minimal shading. It's just kind of line work. There's not a lot of spot blacks. That's not the sort of thing that you'd want to do in a color comic. You wouldn't want to go heavy in some areas and light in others, but it's really appealing on the eyes if your comic is black and white and you take that approach. There's just a lot of stuff that it just feels like it's intended to be in black and white, and I just want to say I wish we were doing more indie black and white comics because it's a great approach to the medium and it's so much more affordable and we'd have more great stories like what Phil Diaz is giving us here if we didn't bamboozle ourselves into thinking that deluxe glossy full color comics is the best edition of the medium. You can take it in a lot of different directions, and you could take it in this direction. This feels perfectly professional. It's and given that we've just read like Liefeld and stuff like that, this feels like exactly in that vein of high octane comics. It's doing everything that we saw in the early '90s.
This is pure Image Comics.
Yeah.
This could have been published right next to Spawn or Shadowhawk or Savage Dragon, or it's very clear Diaz is channeling from that kind of the early McFarlane, especially in terms of like having creative layouts. I think there's also some references to Eisner's kind of the spirit with some of the, especially with the title page there going on there. So I think there's a nod to that. But from what my conversation with Diaz have been, I think that the era of comics he really likes. He talks about, how much he's like Pitt and things of that nature, some of those influences. So like I said, you can tell this was a comic that should be on the shelf right next to Shadowhawk and the rest and the rest of the Spawn and the rest of those Image greats. And so if you like Image Comics, if you like that run of brand new superheroes that aren't, the typical stable of Marvel and DC recognizable. You want just new, fresh characters, but the characters that you feel like you know them because they're channeling energies from stuff that we are familiar with. And so we definitely have a kind of a patriotic sort of Punisher style character archetype. So you can still recognize a lot of things in here. And then we've got our spectral ghost killer, who's kind of a little bit like I guess the more murderer side of the Punisher, I guess, uh, and a little bit of Spectre in a sense. Um, a ghost of vengeance kind of thing going on there. And but then I really can't praise enough just the layout work that's going on here. There's also a bit of sin. There's a flashback that seems to come straight out of Sin City by Frank Miller. Heavy use of black that just kind of like makes the page bleed ink in a way.
No, that was so fun.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's very fun image storytelling, and so I say it's image. I think it's in for its strengths and weaknesses come from that. There's not a lot of overwrought dialogue here. It's very clearly an action comic that's meant to kind of move a straightforward plot from issue to issue. We don't. So this one's just it's keying off of the previous one, and so you're not getting necessarily the one and done episodic storytelling of classic superhero comics. You're getting more of that image decompressed storytelling. So like I said, in both of its strengths and foibles, if you enjoyed image in its heyday, you're gonna enjoy this. This is gonna be feel like it's gonna be just like a they say you can't go home again. This is going home again for for 90s image style
Absolutely
comics.
is.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess I'm going to be the bad guy.
Let's take a brief pause to hear from the awesome creators joining us today and find out what cool projects they're currently working on.
Hey guys, if you love sword and sandal historical fiction with a healthy dose of ancient Roman and Egyptian fantasy mixed in, then check out Kyrie. We've got 450 pages printed so far, a fourth book on the way. Order your books today at curiecomic.com.
Modern day, classic superhero storytelling. Get The Adventures of Omega Girl, issues 1 through 5, now on Indie Planet.
Thank you to our awesome creators, and now back to the video.
'Cause
Do it.
I don't think it helps any creator to not get like some deconstruction in in their craft. Like break them down to build them up. And so I'm gonna say I didn't like it, mainly because there's a couple of issues. One is nothing much happens. It seems like he's just pursuing this main figure throughout most of the story, and I don't really see a lot of other things developing. It's an extremely linear plot, and yeah, there's interesting characters that pop in and out of that, and so you get some fun little sequences. But it's also pretty either spastic or sporadic. I don't know which word I want to choose here, but like it jumps from one thing to another, and it's not clear exactly which track you're supposed to be following at any given moment either. It changes to scenes. There's one where like the character gets knocked out, and then suddenly there's somebody with like a sniper rifle sitting there, and then suddenly it's in another scene, and it's like
Well,
where did the
that's the flashback because there's a little transition going on there where it's like it kind of fades to
it's
the,
not
the other art
clearly
style.
it's not clearly represented.
It's pretty
And
compressed. Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like that, that kind of lost me for a minute there. I was like, what is exactly is going on in this moment? And then the other one is, so you mentioned that there isn't a lot of dialogue. It's kind of action, driven. But then there's a point in the story where like there's a huge dialogue dump in the middle where like they're just standing around and like there's just word bubbles all over the place.
I guess I should clarify that it's not that there's not a lot of dialogue. It's that the dialogue is very much in service of like it's straightforward action. It's not like lots of different intersecting elements and metaphorical depth. It's bad guy
No,
two
yeah.
two characters fighting and he's hunting the killer of the serial killer from the previous issue. It's pretty what you see is what you get here.
Well, I like the exposition that's being given in the beginning a little bit. He's setting mood, and it's not like the pages are devoid of words. It's light on the dialogue, but there's boxes there that are setting the scene for you. But again, there's just a moment in the book all of a sudden where you get this massive dialogue dump, and I don't feel like that serves very well. I prefer to keep that pacing constant throughout. There's no need to all of a sudden interrupt the flow of the story to, have a very verbose discussion. Especially, sorry. Now I'm now I'm
So
getting
it,
flummoxed on my own
it
bile here because I'm so bad in this review. I'm the bad guy, especially when it doesn't really serve a lot of the story quite heavily. Like if there was going to be a big dialogue dump, I'd want to see either a ton of world building happening or a ton of character development.
which dump are we talking about? Just so I'm clear.
Let me get to the pages. It's
Because I actually personally I like it.
pages page 11, I want to say,
Yeah,
is like
Okay.
11, 12.
just
See,
yeah,
I
word
like.
bubble salad, and then page 12 continues that, and then it just gets right back into the
See,
action, and very little
I
being
like
said. So
I'm going to defend that pacing a little bit. For if you want an action oriented story, you're typically going to have your action beats have less dialogue so they can focus more on the punching of each other. And then in between those things is where we get to like know more about like plot development or who's that guy I just fought. Here's some exposition of what I just found as we go to the lab. So that's a pretty typical setup for the sort of action oriented setup. So like for what which is like I said, a shirtless guy with a bat who's fighting a ghost, and he's like, "How do I beat this ghost?" And then we're gonna have these luscious, double page spreads as they fight. Um, you're gonna have those pages where they have to catch up with the story, and that's
I think when
personally,
you
I don't find that to be.
I think when you do that, like you have to be cognizant of the pacing that you've already established throughout most of the story. And if you've been deferring to almost no dialogue, and then suddenly you crank the dialogue up to 12, it just looks like you decided to just start writing a novel all of a sudden in the middle of your comic book, and it doesn't work in terms of what you're describing, where you want to have that moment where you're giving a little bit more story or a little bit more information to the reader after you've kind of gotten them accustomed to going through the story in the pacing that you've already established. So I would say, yeah, you're going to have moments where you have increased dialogue. It's just the amount. You probably need to gauge that according to how much you've been utilizing thus far to tell your story. So those are my criticisms, and take them or leave them. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
I
Yeah.
definitely I think this is better than the Lost Pages. I'll be straight out. I think the People is a stronger effort than the Lost Pages is. I think the Lost Pages has more technical weaknesses to it.
Hmm.
I found like the superhero who he was kind of like the imaginary friend. There was a lot of just storytelling signaling that wasn't happening that I needed further clarification on. I know what these characters more or less can do. Like, one of them's a ghost who can clearly have some interaction with the physical world, but he's kind of invincible to normal means. And I've got a guy with a bat who's very muscular. So I know very easily I can access this story. I don't need a character guidebook in order to understand intuitively what I'm dealing with and to get where the stakes are. So I honestly feel like this is one of the out of what I've read of the Diaz's, this is the People seems to be their strongest artistic and I think storytelling piece. That's not to say it's perfect. Like I said, it still has the 90s strengths also comes with 90s foibles. You know what I mean? And those foibles are, like I said, decompressed storytelling. You're not getting a story per issue, so the storytelling tends to it can drag in spots. And because of the way it's being paced, sometimes there can be clunkiness that erupts out of it. But those are the types of things that people who liked Image were not only okay with overlooking, some of them ended up, like I said, acquiring a taste for it. And people who criticized Image and said that Image was just art, portfolios with some dialogue on it, that, these were the people who, walked away from Image. So like I said, I think how you feel about this also reflects some of that attitude towards, how you might feel towards how someone might feel towards Image Comics, and there's definitely validity to that.
Final thoughts, guys. Matt C.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as you guys know, I didn't grow up with mainstream comics, so this is still a foreign land that I'm trying to learn about and get acclimated to. This particular register for comics, and I think of I know I probably shouldn't even call Image mainstream, but from my perspective, this is mainstream as it gets. and and taking on that register in the indie scene is still, you're still trying to meet that mainstream perspective, and I feel like this is meeting that perspective well. I've seen a lot worse content in the mainstream that that doesn't do this as well. In a way, I can really connect with what Well Read is saying. Like, I just wouldn't pace my exposition scenes the way Image paced exposition scenes, but I completely understand what Twitless is saying, that it's a different taste, it's a different style, that, like so much in comics, actually arose from peculiarities of the market or in production, and economic needs that actually ended up becoming something that people learned to acquire an appreciation for, and actually wanted to mimic and study and perpetuate. Which is fascinating in itself. So I just found it a lot of fun to read a comic that isn't written or paced the way I like to write and pace comics. It's but it's doing the thing really well. So it's just kind of fun to see the thing done well, and to see it done in black and white, it by an illustrator who clearly loves the medium in black and white. So I found that just very satisfying.
Twitless.
So I've said a lot in praise of this. I think if I want to come up with something critical to say for feedback, I think some of the threads could connect better. So when they run into Dr. Octane, which is a cool looking design, this cool flamethrower wielding guy,
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I had a lot of context for why he was there. He's just a bad guy who's burning down a building. And so there were certain threads that haven't connected yet. The young woman who's at the scene of several of these events. And again, those are foibles that impacted early Spawn as well. You know what I mean? So the fact when you look at some of the, I guess, the influence map for some of these, where the Diaz is maybe pulling from, I think they're pulling the strengths. I think they're pulling some of the weaknesses. Some of these characters that I'm seeing, I'm like, I'm not quite sure why you're here, or what the purpose of you is 2 issues in. And so the answer to that would probably be, well, that will be revealed in issues 4 and 5. So you're supposed to just keep reading on. But for many people, there is going to be a criticism of, who are these players that I'm seeing all the time, and why am I caring about this? For example, this whole thing started with an evil serial killer who's the son of the senator getting killed by a ghost, and now we're just chasing the ghost, and it just feels a little arbitrary, I guess. There are certain connections that I think could be stronger. Other than that, like I said, I actually do enjoy this style of storytelling. I also enjoy other types of storytelling, let me be clear, but there's something about just straightforward, unapologetic action with, exposition dumps in the middle that I'm okay with that rhythm. So, and like I said, those of you that are, and you know who you are, audience, and you're
For
usually
shame.
you're a fan of Image, you're gonna like this one. So
Thank you very much for checking out the video. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more.